You're listening to or watching Strangers in Space, and for the next, I don't know, half an hour, knowing us probably an hour, we are going to be talking about No Time to Die, so you don't have to. Hi, I'm JR.
Hello, I'm M.
Hi, I'm Matt.
I'm Simon.
That was Lee at the
Lee
start.
trying to start a running gag.
Trying to start a running gag, collapsed at the Matt Barber point.
Yeah, I know, because I'm so habitual. My
You're
mouth just wouldn't allow me to say I'm Q or Moneypenny.
You're such a Cyberman.
Because anybody watching or listening who doesn't normally watch or listen to this podcast is not going to be thinking, oh, they've got M on the show. They're going to be thinking, okay, the guy who introduced himself as M didn't go on and further introduce himself by his real name, so I have no idea who this is and why I should care what he has to say.
He's the bloke from Borley Rectory.
If it's the first time that you've listened to this podcast, I pity you, basically.
But hello to new listeners.
Hello to new listeners everywhere.
Anyway, there we go. We pity you.
I take it then we have all now watched the James Bond movie. Have we all watched it just the once? Lee, you saw it last night, is that right?
Last night, yeah.
Simon and I went on a Monday morning to a packed cinema. It was full, no seats left, at 10 o'clock on a Monday morning. Simon, how about Matt, you?
Sorry, me? Oh, I went on Sunday to the IMAX in Swindon, which was also packed and had 4 face masks in the screen, and that was it. Wow. Which was very exciting. So I felt like I was in real jeopardy during a Bond film. It added to the frisson.
When you say there's an IMAX in Swindon, do you mean it's like IMAC or something like that?
No, an IMAX.
Isn't
that what you get when you go and have a wax?
I don't know if you guys are joking. Yes. You know what an IMAX is, don't you?
Yes, we do.
Sorry, that's the joke.
I know you live in Devon, but even so.
Oh, says the man who left.
Oh yeah,
2 weeks
so
ago.
quickly. He's so quickly.
3 weeks out of Devon, and I'm going to IMAX. And
to be fair, I was the same when I moved out of Cornwall.
To Devon.
What, you discovered cinema?
To Devon. You'd be amazed the difference it makes.
I'll tell you what, my IMAX experience is basically a cream tea and a fate down here in Devon. So, yeah, exactly.
But when you have a cream tea and you have your scone,
yeah,
is it cream first or is it jam first?
Oh, shut up! Do you know what? Get 2 bottom halves, put it in whatever way you want, and turn it over. Do you know what I mean? It's not difficult.
I read that on the toilet wall about you.
Judging by your James Bond background, you put the jam on top.
Hey,
Matt. That's going down really well on the podcast. Matt has a James Bond background on his Skype.
And he's got blood on the top and nothing underneath.
Done exactly what JR told us not to do.
I know, I do apologise. I caught myself halfway through saying it. I'm sorry.
I've given up.
We've just got really excited we can see each other for a change. So it's all podcasters who are listening, you can now watch us. How can they watch us, JR?
Lee, if they're watching us, they're watching us. If they're not watching us...
If they're listening to us, they can go and watch us as well, can't they?
Yes. The weird thing is, though, Lee, you've just said how excited you are that we can see each other for a change. We have always done this podcast either in person or with cameras.
We're like the caretaker in The Shining. We've always been here.
10 years. 10 years of being able to see each other when we podcast, Lee.
I know, it's a shame, isn't it? I've had my eyes closed for most of them.
Do you paint eyes onto your eyelids?
Yeah, I do, yeah.
Right,
just like Image of Fendal.
Shall we give it a score and get out of here then?
I was Matt.
I want to, before we talk about whether we enjoyed it or not, and this is probably a conversation that should happen at the end, but I want to start with it and have this conversation now so that we can end on the conversation of whether we enjoyed it or not. You know, building up to the score that we give it, because we always finish on a score. So before we talk about whether we enjoyed it or not, I'd like to talk a little bit about what does this mean for the franchise? Because obviously, And for the benefit of anybody listening or watching who has not seen No Time to Die yet, there is no way for us to have this conversation without completely spoiling a bunch of stuff that you will not want to know ahead of going to see it. So if you haven't seen it yet and you're planning on seeing it, stop listening, stop watching now, come back to this podcast when you have seen it. And now, for the benefit of everybody who either doesn't care or has seen it, there's no way we can have this conversation without talking about how this film ends and what that means for the James Bond franchise, which takes me back to Casino Royale and a conversation I'm pretty sure we had when we talked about Casino Royale. I'm not sure how deeply in depth we went into that conversation, but we did talk about Casino Royale, and we talked about the fact that that was, I don't know even if we even described it as a reboot, but the point with Casino Royale was that was James Bond's introduction to working for MI. Is it 5 or 6? I always forget. Six. That's Bond's introduction to, yes, 5 is home and 6 is away, isn't it? So that's Bond's introduction to working for MI6.
In football terms, yes.
So Casino Royale, well, yeah, home and abroad.
Yeah.
Casino Royale is essentially the first story in the James Bond saga. So to all intents and purposes, the Daniel Craig character, especially given what happens in this movie, is being treated as a continuity unto itself, separate from the others. And I think, and there are people, before this film came out, there were people saying, oh, now that you've got the multiverse thing with Marvel and so on, I can foresee a time in the future where you'll get the next James Bond will suddenly have Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan turning up to have an adventure with him. And I'm thinking, well, that's really not going to happen now, is it? Point being, I guess it's always been something that I've considered is that you treat each one of the Bonds as an individual entity. So essentially, each time you get a new Bond, you essentially go back to the well and start again. So, I mean, there's that joke at the start of the Lazenby movie where it says the other guy, and does the joke about the other guy. But that's an inside joke for people watching the films. And that is so early in the run of films. That's the first change in Bond. But the Daniel Craig movies to the Roger Moore movies, let's say, are like the Sean Connery movie was to the David Niven movie. In other words, unrelated to all intents and purposes. So they can keep on making these Bond movies. And this one does finish. Simon and I were talking about this because the lights came on and everyone started leaving. So we went and we said we'd check up on it later. This one does finish with a caption saying James Bond will return.
Oh, it does?
It does,
I
apparently.
didn't stick around. Oh, good. Oh, that's nice.
It does. Yes, and I always assumed it would. I mean, we'll talk in a minute about whether the next one starts with an actual reboot and James Bond joining again, or whether they do something different, because it's quite possible they'll do something completely different. But do we all feel that way about the individual Bonds, that they're all essentially a story unto themselves? Or do we feel that, because I was expecting quite a backlash against this, people saying, oh, this has pissed all over the franchise, you should never have done this, because, and Casino Royale, they could have said the same thing, to have Daniel Craig as the very first Bond, when clearly there've been 4 others before him, at least 4, if not 5 or 6. There could have been a backlash then. I don't think the backlash would have been worth it. I've not seen any backlash. How do we feel about it? Matt, you're a bigger fan, I think, than the rest of us, maybe, or perhaps Lee is. But Matt, I'll come to you first because you're the one with the Bond background. There you go. Did it yourself, Simon.
I've never bought the idea that it's a continuous. So there is this kind of fan theory that James Bond is a code name, and it's handed down from actor to actor, which I've never bought. There are in-jokes and sort of Roger Moore avenges the death of Lazenby's wife, for instance. But I've never bought that. I think almost every film is a sort of soft reboot. Sometimes with overlapping characters. So Judi Dench crossed into Daniel Craig, which makes no sense if you're thinking of it as an ongoing series.
No.
I think Casino Royale, I can understand the backlash about killing Bond, because showing the beginning of Bond is a different thing to killing Bond. So showing the beginning of Bond is an obvious reboot, an acceptable killing Bond, whilst I don't mind it, I can see that that's something that's never happened in a Bond movie and does feel like a sort of a final moment, even though it's obviously not going to be a final moment. So I can understand.
Does he die in this one then, Matt?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. Let's get out early, shall we?
Very much.
Lee, I did give the spoiler warning, and I was
Yeah.
very emphatic about it.
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
So I think I can see why there's kind of sort of a wobble about that.
I don't think there has been, though. I've not seen any backlash at all, which I'm quite glad about. I think most people have said it's brave. We'll talk about what we think about it in a minute, I guess. But, you know, for the time being, let's talk about what it means. But, I mean, do you kind of agree? You basically kind of agree then?
Yeah. I mean, the fact, because I didn't stick around, the fact that it says James Bond will return. So there are three things they could do. They could tell the ongoing story of 007 and then make it about a code, the code rather than the named person, which could happen. They could carry on with James Bond, but with the same kind of family around him, but just forget about the events of this film, which they did with Judi Dench in Casino Royale, or they can just recast completely. And my instinct tells me that they're just going to recast completely because this is going to be in 4 or 5 years. By which time people will have an appetite for something fresh, something new, I think.
Yeah, sure. Right, Lee, I'll save you for a second then, as the big James Bond fan. Simon, as somebody who's never seen a Bond film before. Simon, what do you think? Because we came out of the pictures and we went together, but we came out and we talked a little bit, but mostly we saved ourselves for, you know, this podcast now. So what do you think about what this means for the ongoing continuity? Do you kind of agree that each Bond is a separate entity?
I don't think I think subconsciously I've always made that assumption because there's always been the fact that different actors, it's not quite Doctor Who, is it? And each Bond seems to occupy their own little universe. There's always a subtle difference between, you know, they're treated as eras, but also the fact that, you know, those early films were all adaptations of books. So it always felt like every film was an adaptation and therefore was its own thing. It didn't necessarily flow into the next. Yeah, like you say, you had ongoing characters like Jaws with Roger Moore, which was almost like an ongoing joke, really. But then you had Blofeld being played by different actors. I think my childlike mind assumed that he'd had plastic surgery and therefore looked different. So
and Blofeld was different. The same Bond, wasn't he? Blofeld turns up twice with Connery, or is it 3 times with Connery? I can't remember. It's at least twice, I'm sure.
Twice, I think.
He's not in Diamonds Are Forever?
He's in Diamonds Are Forever and, You Only Live Twice.
So twice with Connery. Anyway, go on, Simon, sorry.
I don't think this is going to harm things at all. I do. The only thing I think it does mean is possibly that there will be a fairly decent gap. Considering the end of the movie, I can't see how they can bring out another film off the back of that easily without, you know, I'm thinking of the Spider-Man movies. There's got to be like 4 or 5 years between them, maybe. So
having said that, I think whenever the next film comes out, I'd suggest maybe 3 or 4 years myself, because I think they'll want to capitalize on this. The reason being, I think the next time a film comes out, people flock to it to see how they do it. And people will want to watch how they do it as opposed to just read about how they're going to do it, because people will want to see firsthand how it works, won't they?
There's also the possibility that they're not going to do a James Bond movie next, although that would be the ultimate name, but they'll do a Nomi 007 movie because they've obviously set up this character. And they've always wanted, Eon have always wanted to do this, so they wanted to do it with Halle Berry, but didn't get round to it. So there's always been this plan to have a female James Bond film, and they've never quite. Well, they tried a few years ago, but it didn't quite work out.
And sure, you can do the female 007 film in this instance with a lot of the same characters out of this movie. So in all but having a male in the lead, it would be the next Bond movie. And sure, that could be the stepping stone between here and the next Bond, whatever that is, possibly. Lee, what are your thoughts on the ongoing continuity before we move on to talk about the film itself?
Yeah, they've ignored it pretty much its whole life. So apart from the odd nod here and there into the past, like Roger Moore's nod to the the dead wife sort of thing. This
But
one,
this time they've got 5 films that
They've
sort
got
of
5
form a
films.
continuity, haven't
it's
they?
it's a film event. It's a 5-night film event. It's a Russell T Davies, children of the not children of the Stones, the other one, but it
Children
is.
of
It's
Earth.
like that's right. So there's 5 films, all completely and utterly connected, which we've never really had before, because the only connections have been characters, to be honest, or the actual ongoing MI6 characters. There's been no real continuity in the Roger Moores, not even in Pierce Brosnan, anything like that. You just get a few characters coming back. But yeah, this is a different beast. This was preempting almost the whole Netflix major, massive, big, money pumping sagas and films and TV films they're putting out at the moment. So it feels like this is right. This is right. This last one is chocker full of everything the last 4 films have got in it. It's wrapping up stuff nicely. He dies well. There's a legacy there that he's left, which is lovely, and also it has wrapped it up. I can't see that this franchise where it is now is going to continue the same. It will be different. It'll either start again as a reboot, or it will take the universe it's created and expand it. Once Disney buys it, you'll have loads, won't you? You'll have like little James Bond and Halle Berry James Bond. But
This one's just moved from Sony to Universal,
right.
so I don't think it's going to be sold on again anytime soon.
You never know. Marvel might have it, but from where we are now, this is a perfect end to an era, and the next era I don't think is going to look massively different in its kind of like landscape that we're already looking at, because it's not that different to Casino Royale. Actually, when you put the 2 films together, they're still quite the same universe. Spectre's
Well, that's
obviously
kind of
so
the
much more
point.
background.
This
It
a
is, but
universe
if you
of
think
5
about
movies.
how I know, but if you think about how long it's taken for these movies to come out, how long has it been? 12, 14,
15 years.
15 years. 15 years. It's got more continuity and more connection than any of the Star Wars films and anything else that's out there, as far as even Lord of the Rings. It's got a real good connection to each other, and that was an important thing that they needed to have done. I would have liked this film not to have necessarily built on the Spectre and gone out a little bit and just forgot that past, because we got past it. But it wasn't going to do that. It was never going to do that, and I'm kind of glad it didn't, actually, for other reasons we'll talk about in a minute.
Right, so
And sorry, Judi Dench, pain in the ass. So that whole thing where she was brought over, they'd have been better off just getting a new actor in, and then straight away you've got a brand new season.
But
no,
Judi Dench and Daniel Craig were brilliant together.
No, they absolutely were. But the issue but
I don't think it's an issue. That's the point.
No, I don't really. But people do have issues with continuity.
Well, that's the point. I've not seen any complaints about issues with continuity in Bond, and although I'm not a member of Bond groups and things like that, but I've not seen anybody on my time. A lot of people on our timelines are obviously talking about this movie and have been talking about these movies over the past 15 years, and I've not seen any complaints about continuity. And I think that's healthy. I don't think you should, and I think it's right that when somebody like Judi Dench comes over from the Pierce Brosnan verse into the Daniel Craig verse, at the time, it doesn't seem like such a terribly big thing until you realize that Daniel Craig is a reboot. And even then, when that happens, it's almost like, well, Judi Dench is playing a character who's called the same thing and who is essentially the same character, but in a different continuity, and there's no reason not to. It'd be like having Judi Dench playing M in 2 different alternate universes. Film sagas, cartoon sagas, comic strips, books, whatever, move into alternative universes all the time. Essentially, I think what we're seeing is James Bond leaning into the idea of alternative universes, basically, alternative continuities rather than actual parallel universes. But that's essentially what's happening. So my question now is
the thing is with the Pierce Brosnan, he was called James Bond, right? Whatever his past was, which we don't really know about. Daniel Craig is definitely called James Bond. We've seen the gravestones, unless his entire background was made up, which is never really said. So he is called James Bond. That's his name, and he earns his 007 in that first film. You see it. So it's plainly a complete and utter beginning for James Bond. So if it does continue in this universe, obviously, I think Matt said it already, the only way you're going to continue this is by, and they've already said it in this film, that the 007 is just a number. It could be anyone.
Oh no, I hate that idea.
No, well, 007 is just a number. It is. Anybody can be a 007.
What I mean is, Lee, I hate the idea of them saying each of the Bonds is a different person who just takes on the number. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah, but the only way that you're going to be able to move forward with that is a complete start again, or you say, look, we loved our agent James Bond so much. He did so much for the world. He saved us. We're going to, in memoriam, we're going to use his name. And then when you get to the 007, that will be your code name. That's the only way you can do it, right?
Way into
Otherwise, it's going to be.
I think Barbara Broccoli, I don't think gives one thought about continuity in the same way that we do. I think if she can get Ralph Fiennes to come back and Ben Whishaw to come back, or if they want to come back, and she wants to cast Hugh Jackman as Bond, which she won't, but if she wanted to, then she'll just go ahead and do it. And there won't be any explanations. There won't be any.
But she's not writing them. That's why this is setting up. Yes, I know, but this is setting up a lot of things for the Stephen Moffat effect, isn't it? He set up all of those transgender, renewals and things like that. The body was changing. You can be anything you want, and the Doctor can be anything she wants, right? And that was Stephen Moffat setting that up. I know it's mentioned in the past, but the whole point of trying to elongate Doctor Who's future was to put that in place, and Stephen did that. That's what I think was happening in this film. They were playing with it all the time, but I'm sure we get to that point with the new 007 in the film.
Okay, maybe. On the subject of what do they do from now, my question was going to be, is the next Bond going to have a total continuity of his own in the same way this one did, so that they lean into the idea of starting the story, having some in the middle, and then ending the story again? And I would suggest with the next one, perhaps you don't do that, because if you do that, you might be leaning too much into setting a precedent that you might not necessarily want to hold to too heavily going forwards. Because if you lean into the idea of each new actor who comes along has to have an origin story and probably also a final story too, then you're kind of setting yourselves boundaries that you might not want to be set. So I don't know, you could just say in an interview or somewhere offhandedly, well, all the Bonds have been the same Bond, and some of them are set in the 1960s and some of them set in the 2020s, but essentially they all take place within one another's continuity. When they're set is just relevant to when they were made, not relevant to where they take place in Bond's own timeline. And you could just say that the next Bond is just earlier in Daniel Craig's timeline than the point at which Daniel Craig ends.
It's interesting because the only negative comment I've heard from somebody who's seen it is purely a taste thing, in as much as the fact that they said you can't kill James Bond. Part of the reason I like the films is because he just gets away all the time, and that is probably as far as a lot of people will think about this.
I think
that James Bond film is a James Bond film.
Yeah, is that
I think it's great, but I think it is a valid point to make, in that one of the characteristics of James Bond is he's ridiculously indestructible and he just survives. So killing him does change the character, but that doesn't matter in the last film of a sequence. I genuinely don't. I think Barbara Broccoli and Eon think in terms of production and in terms of business, not in terms of ongoing storylines. They've got an ongoing. They've had an ongoing storyline for 5 movies, but that's kind of been engineered as it's gone along. This film could have been 2 films. It could have been Spectre, could have been the last. Skyfall could have been the last Daniel Craig. So they've always been sort of, this is accidentally the final film of a 5-film sequence. And I think
that was his, that was his stipulation when he agreed to do another movie, because originally Spectre was supposed to be his last, and they persuaded him to come back. I wonder if he said, I'll come back as long as you kill the character off. And they acquiesced.
He said that he had an idea for a story. So the idea for the story came from Daniel Craig. Whether that's killing Bond off, or whether that's the rest of the story, the the virus DNA killing thing.
Well,
Who
I'd
knows?
imagine that his idea for a story is that Bond is no longer part of MI6 and somebody else has got the 007 tag. I'd imagine that that would be the premise
Possible,
that you'd
yeah.
come with. And just because he comes with one premise doesn't mean to say he can't throw in other ideas afterwards, like, I'll come back if you kill me off. I think I'll come back if you kill me off. I mean, it's often been said about Harrison Ford that that was his stipulation for doing The Force Awakens, wasn't it? I don't know if anybody knows that for a fact, but it's something that's often said about it. Let's talk about, before we go into more in depth, then, let's talk about the fact that this does kill him off, because you've had sort of 4 movies prior to this that have been building up to Blofeld and Spectre, whether by accident or by design. You get to the film that does Spectre and does Blofeld, and that film does end sort of cliffhanger into this one by having Blofeld as a captive, and it's obvious that there is at least, you know, room there to leave that open for that to be picked up on in the next movie, and indeed so it is. In this one, and I would suggest this is perhaps one of the slightly weaker parts, so I'll talk about a couple of things I found a bit weaker before we talk maybe about things I found stronger. It's kind of got a bit of a nothingy villain in this one. So in the end, it's like Bond, he does this great big, I mean, whatever you think of the quality of the film, Spectre is this big operatic Bond where he comes up against his foster brother or whatever you want to call it, you know, which should have been the big glorious finale to the sequence. And then in this one, there's this little guy who's got nothing to do with anybody, who you've never heard of before. And yes, I think the plan itself, the nanotechnology thing, I like the way that worked. And I like the fact that the way those sort of nanobots work. I thought that was a good plot point, but I found Rami Malek slightly underwhelming as a villain. And I don't know whether I liked that. To find him slightly underwhelming as a villain, I thought for me slightly unbalanced the movie, in that I think you needed something slightly stronger as a villain. But at the same time, yeah. So I would have liked it to be more theatrical, but at the same time, I quite liked the irony of, if you're finally going to kill Bond off, it's this guy that you've never heard of, who's got nothing to do with anything. So I don't know. What was your, before we talk about the movie in toto, I guess, and other specific things like the 007 thing and what have you, what were your thoughts about Rami Malek and sort of the overarching plot? Simon?
It doesn't usually happen with me with actors. I'm able to kind of segregate their different performances, but I just couldn't get Freddie Mercury out of my head. So that was because he's such a distinctive actor. And he also, I think his way is to just give these strange sideways looks and look slightly unhinged, which I think works really well. I thought it was an odd move to get rid of Blofeld like that. That at that stage in the movie, because it felt like he was the big bad all the way through. He's been the big bad, and
I really liked that actually, but we'll come back to that.
Yeah. I mean, it was unexpected, wasn't it? And I like the way it happened.
Yeah.
I also liked it was kind of a nod to the Man with the Golden Gun, wasn't it? Or was it Goldfinger? I'm trying to think. That scene, that set with the pool in the middle was a massive nod to the kind of.
Oh, it's Thunderball, isn't it?
Oh, was it? I'm getting them all mixed up.
I could be wrong. No,
there's a nod to almost every movie.
Yeah.
I think Man with the Golden Gun, I was thinking because it's all set in an island like that. Is that whole? Yeah.
They actually go back to, unless I'm mistaken, they go back to the actual places where 2 of them at least were filmed, and film in the exact spots where particular sequences happened. For at least 2 movies, if not more. And those being Dr. No and On Her Majesty's Secret Service are the ones I noticed. And I'm not a particularly big Bond fan, but even I noticed that.
So yeah, I kind of like the set piece. I like the fact that he supposedly left the scene and then he hadn't. He'd hung around to be there at the end with Bond. And I like the fact that the way that Bond just dispatched with him, you know, he just had enough of him and just shot him. So that was great. But that kind of fitted with what you're saying of him being almost like this low-level villain. Although he was incredibly, you know, his plan was incredibly well thought out and was probably one of the biggest threats that Bond's ever faced. So that's the thing. I suppose what we're looking at is the fact that the weight has shifted, that suddenly Bond's priorities changed. He was no longer fighting for England. He was fighting for a family. He never used that word. There was that lovely bit where he goes, "Oh, this is my," and I don't think he doesn't actually say family, but we're all saying it in our heads. So that's what he's fighting for at the end. So this is why this is such a unique Bond film, and I think it kind of works. So the bad guy, I suppose, is neither here nor there. The threat is there. Well, the whole thing with this bad guy is his issue is family, isn't it? It's the fact that his family got destroyed, and therefore he's going to take revenge on everyone else. Meanwhile, Bond's been handed a family, so he's trying to protect his family. So I think dramatically, I think the pressure was there. But I agree that maybe he could have been more as an individual, as a character, he could have been a bit more theatrical, maybe a little bit more unhinged. But then you got Blofeld doing the same thing. So,
Lee, did you find it at all disappointing that you had Voldemort there in the house and they didn't use him?
Voldemort. What are you on about?
What did you think of the overall fact that the final Bond movie in this sequence ends not on a damp squib, but on a kind of a lower key note? I think then
it's fine. It's fine, and I think it needed to be done like that. Actually, the issue I have is a bit like Simon with Rami Malek, is that he was so underplayed that it almost sucked out the life a little bit in that last sequence with Bond. But I suppose Bond is also, kind of on the edge of knowing he just can't win. So that kind of last shot into his head was a 007. That was a killing moment of I really don't care anymore. And it was quite low. It was quite a low feeling, but then you get a massive pullback with all of the missiles landing on that beautifully operatic island, as seen in Sean Connery's film, I think. You Only Live Twice, is that right? And you just think, hang on, this is still Bond on a silo being blown up with a baddie, and it's just, how more Bond can you end this film? It's just great. It's just that he doesn't get away with it. I think the sad thing, the thing that made me go, oh, was that we actually saw him kind of practically get blown up. There was, like we've all said already, there was no way that he could escape this. Some people are thinking, well, if you'd have just cut away, maybe he's still alive somewhere. But to be honest, we've had him alive and escaping from MI6 and being on the run for the last 2 or 3 movies anyway. So, this was the final shocker and the final.
And you had the nanobots thing. That's the nail in the coffin, literally the nail in the coffin. Even if he escaped, he still would have had. Although I did think that he was going to escape, but he could never see his family again because he knew that if he touched them, he would kill them. And I thought that's why they'd written it in there, but obviously not.
But that in its exactly. But that in itself.
Well, I think that's in there. That's what allows him to make the sacrifice.
Exactly. That's exactly what it does. But what a great idea. What a great idea. What a great twist and a great sadness that is. What a great pathos moment. I love it.
Is it because, Matt, that they're actually telling stories about James Bond, the character, that it doesn't need to be about Bond versus the villain as heavily as it has been in the past? Previously, in the 1970s and 80s, these movies were all about, who's the big villain? Give us a big operatic performance. Now, these movies, certainly since Daniel Craig came aboard, they're about, they're films about this character, James Bond, going back to his ancestral home, giving him a foster brother who's a villain. They're not about the villains in the same way as they were before. So does that mean that the Rami Malek character is actually what this film required, because one of the few notes that I have seen on social media expressing disappointment is that the Rami Malek character seems a bit of a non-entity. But I don't know. For me, I'm sort of leaning into the idea that, well, that's fine because it's not really about him. It's about Bond and about Bond's family. Do you think that's it?
Yeah, I think also it's about the Rami Malek character, whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce.
Lucifer.
Lucifer Safin.
I can't believe they didn't make anything of the Lucifer thing.
Well, I can't believe they didn't just reveal he was Dr. No, because that would make sense of the film's title, and he's pretty much Dr. No anyway. It's about what he does, though. So his actions, the fact that he manages to wipe out this entire organization that's been the kind of the devil on James Bond's back just in one blow. So he is underplayed, but it's that just brings his actions to the fore, I think. There's also a feeling when Bond shoots him, that's Bond's final kill, I think. I don't think Bond kills anybody after that, which in a Bond film, Bond's final kill has to be like groundbreaking. And it's done in such a sort of a weary, kind of resigned way that does the death of Safin tells the story of the Daniel Craig Bond from kind of blunt instrument running through plywood doors to just getting fed up of killing and just doing it once more and then just crawling up to the hatch to die. I think that the Rami Malek characters, the Rami Malek character has its place, and I think the way Rami Malek plays him does work for me, that sort of underplaying. So yeah, I didn't have a problem with it. I did feel that it was sort of underplayed, and I did feel like it was sort of low key, but I haven't minded that with the Daniel Craig ones. I mean, the Quantum of Solace, the Matthew Amalric character, so he's probably the least sort of out there villain in the whole of James Bond. And again, I kind of like that. I sort of like the fact that, you know, these people there's this sort of touch of reality. Not
all of them, all of the
reality.
villains in all of the films have been underplayed and quiet, and dangerous.
Yeah, I would say the Skyfall, the villain in Skyfall was a little bit more traditionally Bond-like. I mean, they're all slightly disfigured in some way.
There's, in all of the films, in all of the Daniel Craig films, they've been walking this line between making films that are just decent films that happen to be about this character who's James Bond, and there have been influences from the past, to sort of leaning into those influences. As we said, there's a lot in this film that is taken from the movies of the past. But here's a point. It's 25 minutes before you get the opening titles on this movie. And what comes before the titles in a Bond movie is traditionally either A, all action, or B, not related to what comes after, or C, both, very often both. In this, you've got 25 minutes. It is very far from being all action. In fact, there's barely any action in that 25 minutes at all. And that 25 minutes is all prologue to what comes after. So that prologue is very, very different to the traditional James Bond thing. And actually almost made me not quite mind the Billie Eilish song, which I still think is awful. But the point being, this is, in the end, a decent movie that happens to be James Bond. But there is so much in this movie that goes, right, you've seen this before, the location from Dr. No. Right, you've seen this before, the location from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, even down to ending on the song from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And finally, cementing that as a theme as opposed to just a song that takes place half an hour into a movie. So finally, that's officially a theme now. This is not a Bond movie, but it is a Bond movie. Matt, you seem desperate to say something or not?
No, not really.
Okay.
I agree. I mean, I think actually we have all the time in the world. The theme works better here than it did on Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, it had a proper place here twice. It was featured, and it had a proper place. I liked the pre-titles. That pre-title sequence, I really liked. It was almost sort of horror movie like the very opening flashback. And the Bond bit made me think of the final act of Casino Royale, the Venice act, Casino Royale. But I think it was done better than, for me, that was always the weakest part of Casino Royale, a film that I think is one of the best films of the 2000s. So it was nice to see an alternative doing of that, or an alternative version of that.
One thing I thought probably didn't work in this was the new 007. And I'll tell you for why. Not because of who she is, but because of the fact that they don't really give her much of anything to do. In the end, she drives away on the boat. You know, that whole Anna de Armas sequence in the sort of about a third of the way in, whatever it was, where you suddenly get this ass-kicking female agent who surprises everybody by being so much better than what you imagined she's going to be going in. Why is it not the new 007 who gets to do that bit? That's what she needed. And in the end, she just sort of drives around as a bit of a sidekick who's a bit ineffectual. And I kind of felt, well, why have her at all if you're going to do that? It felt a bit like they came up with the idea before they came up with the story, and then they didn't really have anywhere in the story to put the idea, if you know what I mean.
And it's compounded by that dreadful bit where she hands the number back to him.
Oh
my God,
yes,
that was really
didn't
poorly.
work. Yeah.
I understand why they did it. It just wasn't done very well.
It's
just
so awkward.
Yeah, it was. Oh, yeah.
But this is why I think a spin-off is likely. This is why I think not a continuation of Bond films with Lashana Lynch, but a spin-off movie with Lashana Lynch to make sense of why they've introduced her. In Doctor Who terms, it's a bit like the Ruth Doctor, introducing the Ruth Doctor. If they do more with the Ruth Doctor, I'm going to be happy with the idea. If the Ruth Doctor never comes back, then I'm going to think it's just a wasted opportunity. So at the moment, I'm sort of on the fence of her portrayal in this. It feels like an introduction for something more, which I think they will.
I don't think she would have handed the number back if that was what they were planning. I really don't.
Well, I think she'll just get that. I mean, she was clearly positioned in the final scene as being Bond's replacement in this universe, if you want to think of it as a universe, because she was there. That was the new family.
Yeah, you may get this period where she's never seen as Bond, as the next Bond, and that's when you can open up in the future if you want to for, oh look, here's her 10 years 007. I'm with JR.
Just a second, Lee, just a second. Is she in that shot at the end where they're having the drinks?
Yeah.
Yes.
She is. Yes, I couldn't remember. Yeah. Go on, Lee. Sorry.
I'm with you, JR. I don't think she was. I thought she was more underwhelming than Rami in some respects. I mean, she should have been there at the moment. If you wanted to show a 007, you need to show, just look at all the 007s we've got and have a go. I know she's supposed to be not James Bond. That's she's just another agent who's really good. But you're right, she didn't get her moment to shine, to really show off who she was. She had a moment where I think she was just kung fuing about a bit. But you're right, the other actress, what's her name? Anna, did you say Anna?
Anna de Armas.
Yeah, she was unbelievably good. She was so good. And I think, yeah, you're right. That's
Ben Affleck's girlfriend.
Really, yeah. Just the way she was playing it is hilarious. And she was really good at what she did. I just don't know if Lashana... maybe she has got the acting chops, and maybe she was just not given what was needed to really show off.
She's a good actress. The part just seemed like somebody had started writing it and then gone off and concentrated on something else. Yeah, I don't know. Felt like that. Let's talk about stuff we did like then. I mean, the idea of Bond having a daughter, having a family, that was almost as big a revelation as Bond gets killed. And a bit like Casino Royale, and we'll talk about the Harry Potter movies on a future podcast, but I finished my Harry Potter watch through now, and there's one Harry Potter movie where all of the characters actually feel like real people. But this was a Bond movie where all the actors all playing real people. So M, for example, and Ben Whishaw and Naomi Harris, all the others, instead of just being people on the sidelines who come in and do their bit, and you don't really think of them necessarily as people. Sometimes you think of them as characters, but you don't necessarily think of them as people. I'm watching this movie, and throughout this entire movie, I'm thinking of everybody in it as people. They all feel like they have agency, and they all feel like they've got a relationship with each other, apart from the 007. But, all the others, it just felt like a film about people in a way that Bond movies generally don't. And I think one of the reasons for that is this is only the third movie, really, where you get to have character development. So Bond has always been a franchise where there's no character development. But if you allow character development to happen, then suddenly you can have relationships between the lead character and the other characters around them, because you need those relationships in order for it to be the character that develops, as opposed to just plot points that happen to that character. So, and on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where he gets married and she gets killed, Casino Royale, where you get to learn about how he comes into the service in the first place, and this one, I think they're head and shoulders above all the other Bond movies in that they're Bond movies with character development. So you get to have all the other stuff, car chases, punch-ups, skiing down a mountainside. You get to do all that other stuff, and you get character development as well. So I think this easily falls into the, maybe not the three best, but I think the three most affecting. And this was a Bond movie that made me cry at the end, and I was sitting next to Simon and trying not to let it show. But you know what I mean? How often do you get that in a Bond movie? Mm-hmm. So Bond with character development and as a movie about real people. Lee, as a Bond fan, was that a surprise to see?
It wasn't a surprise to see because we've seen it in the last two films building, but there was a lot of it in this. There were lots of little tiny moments that didn't need to be in the film. They could have cut it and made it shorter, but they left them in, a bit on the bridge with them and that sort of thing. I love all those moments. You then get that kind of espionage spy thriller feel without even trying. It's just two blokes in ties on a bridge talking covertly, but also with that kind of twist of humanity and friendship. And definitely more of that. I think they'd be foolish not to bring any of that stuff back when it does come back, and I have a feeling it's going to be peppered a lot more with that kind of human side for sure. It's not going to be anything like the Bonds we remember in the past. It's not going to be Fast and Furious or anything along those lines. And you're right, the action sequences, and they were long, weren't they? But they were great. They were really fantastic. There were lots of showbacks to old Bonds, but it didn't feel like it was so crowbarred in that you wouldn't feel you didn't feel like it was just crowbarred in. There's that lovely moment in the car where he's looking at her and he's almost wanted her to just get shot at that point because he doesn't trust her. It's all this Vesper thing all over again. And they're shooting, and he's sitting there and you think, well, what's going to happen next? And then he goes and brings out the big guns from the lights of the car and you think, this is hilarious, but also perfectly timed. If you feel you need that relief. So
and also, that's well one of those. Yeah, that's one of those moments where you think, well, why hasn't this happened before when he's had guns like this? Whenever he comes out with a car like that, you think, well, the obvious thing to do is exactly this. And yet, of course, they never get around to it. So it seemed 2 or 3 times in this movie, like they were saying, well, the thing that should have happened in movie X 50 years ago was this, so let's do it now. So there was a bit of that. Simon, what did you think of this as a Bond movie with the feels? And were you crying next to me just as much as I was crying next to you?
Yeah, I was quite affected. I've got a theory about this, which is, one thing that's always occurred to me about Bond, and particularly in these Daniel Craig movies, is because you start to learn about his background and where he's come from, the fact that he essentially hasn't got anything, and he has these empty relationships, essentially, but always trying to stay away from something which might weaken him, as in falling in love. And I think that's kind of the melancholy of James Bond. That's what's always been there. It's always been there in the music. And what I thought was interesting from the opening credits is this whole vision of him and Britannia. You see the trident all the time, and all the way through the film, the trident is his symbol. So you kind of get this idea that he's fighting for this nondescript identity of Britain, Britannia, and that's what he's fighting for. He's fighting for his queen and country, and it doesn't quite ring true these days. And what I thought was brilliant in this film, how you see things shift of what he's fighting for, where he goes all the way from being this machine who is fighting for his country. Oh, actually, no, at the beginning of the film, he's stepped away from it, isn't he? He's had enough of it. And then by the end of the film, he's found these connections. He found friendship. We've got the loss of Felix. We've not mentioned that. The fact that they killed off Felix.
Yeah.
And he's, and he's made friends with M. He talks to him like a friend, like he did with the previous M. And he starts to warm to people's frailties. So by the end of the film, he's fought, and he gives his life for his family, for his daughter, and he's got back the family that he lost, that we found out about in the previous film. So I don't know, if I was going to be pretentious, and I really like this idea, it's that he's fallen out of love with his country, but he's found what he does love. like a lot of us have. I've fallen out of love with Britain, if I'm perfectly honest. You know, it's or what Britain supposedly represents. That you know, we've this looking for identity that seems to be going on in our country at the moment, and trying to latch onto something that never actually existed in the first place. And maybe that's what this whole Bond thing is inspired by. I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
No, I think there's some elements in there as well. I think you're right. You know, we've just had this global pandemic. This was written before the global pandemic, so it's pretty timely. And in a way, it's much more international. It's opened up. Bond is much more kinder to every other human now within its parameters of writing and storyboarding and story writing rather. So it's not so sexist. It's not so this, that, and the other. It's being really clever at trying not to do that, and I think it works. But also, what it's done is, instead of being very insular, I mean, a lot of it's attack on MI6, a lot of personal attacks on Bond. You know, Spectre is a worldwide organisation, but it was all happening, and it feels like, you know, you are going around the world, but it's always centred for Queen and Country, like you say. This one didn't feel like that. It was a global effort all round, and Felix dying was really quite a sad moment, but I knew he was going to go, so I was waiting for his death at some point. It's better than the death he got in the 80s. Have you ever seen the death he got in the 80s? The character thing?
Shocking.
It's shocking. It's
I mean,
you'll laugh with
this was why I wasn't entirely upset by Felix Leiter's death, because he's basically Kenny from South Park. That he is in the Bond books, in the franchise, he's the character they kill so Bond can avenge. That's kind of his purpose. But he's American, so they're allowed to kill him. And all Bond films are international. I mean, they're all sort of Bond. When Bond retires, never retires to the UK. He always retires to Jamaica or the south of France or Italy or Venice or wherever. I didn't see any difference in this film. I think there is still a sort of a patriotic spine to every Bond film, because Bond is an English-British franchise. So
yeah,
the very
M compounds his stance, doesn't he, by saying, you know, it's for Britain. You know, he's there saying, for all this. In fact, he's almost lost his will to live in the place he's trying to protect by going, well, I'm staying for all this. And you can see that James Bond is like, I've traveled around the world. You know, I've lived in Jamaica, and you know, this is one. Jamaica.
You can see Bond kind of agreeing with him, and then going off to save the world.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that convinces Bond. Partly. I mean, I think M talking about what patriotism means for him, which is all of this. I don't think that was a hollow thing he was saying. I think that was genuinely supposed to be a definition of patriotism within this Bond film.
Yeah, it didn't feel incredibly heartfelt though, coming from M, I have to say.
Matt, I think particularly enjoyed Christoph Waltz last time around. What did you think of Blofeld this time around?
Did I enjoy him? I didn't mind it. I thought it was quite good and sinister. I liked him, and I liked it in this time round. I like that they brought him back, because I think a lot of things that happen in this film make Spectre better. And I know we've talked, I don't know, in the past or in the future, about whether episode 1 of, say, a Doctor Who story can be made better or worse by its subsequent episodes. I don't think you can make something worse with subsequent stories, but I think you can certainly improve on what's gone before, and I think this
does make more sense of it.
Yeah, and I think this makes sense of a lot of what happened in Spectre entirely by accident. And I think Blofeld is one of those things. I mean, it was sort of it was a cameo, but it was a really well shot Silence of the Lambs cameo.
Well, I felt the way it worked was really effective, because I thought the first sort of hour and a half of the movie was building you up for the idea that Blofeld was going to have been behind this plot on his previous compatriots. And then when Blofeld finally turns up to step into the limelight, he gets killed too. And all of a sudden that pulls the rug out from under your feet. And I thought the way it did it was really effective. Bit like, going back to our Doctor Who analogies, bit like when you get Ashad the Cyberman gets killed by the Master in the Timeless Children, and you think Ashad's going to be this. It's Ashad, isn't it? Whatever. He's going to be this huge monumental villain character, just knocked down. Nothing at the moment when he should have stepped into the limelight. So I thought the Blofeld thing here was really effective.
So I like that, and I liked when they killed off all the Spectre in the party, partly because that does the same thing, but also because one of the underdeveloped things in Spectre is this idea that every ring has a trace of DNA that's somehow linked. So there's something going on with Spectre DNA that's been engineered, and they never really go into it or develop it. And in this film, they sort of take that and they turn it into this kind of mass execution of Spectre. And that was really satisfying. I found that really satisfying.
I was gonna say the same word, satisfying. And then knowing that it plainly wasn't Blofeld and his plan had backfired was hilarious. But this moment of him kind of turning up, like you say, in the Silence of the Lambs situation with Bond was really good. As Daniel Craig was so weary in that scene, kind of like, come on, just tell me where it is. Let's play no games here. And then when he does get angry finally, and Blofeld dies of the disease, I was like, hang on, what? Where's the moment where he takes the helicopter, gets him in the wheelchair, and then drops him down the chimney? That's not happened here. You have to move on really quickly. But
and that's the point where we realise that getting the wheelchair in the helicopter and dropping him down the big chimney isn't a good part of a James Bond film. It's actually something rubbish rather than. Isn't that where they film Silver Nemesis? It's done in the same place. But the other thing, what was the other thing I really liked? The other thing I really liked has slipped from my memory. No, it will come back to me.
The bit where they found a bionic eye on Blofeld.
Yes, that's the other bit I really liked.
Oh, you like that?
No, I thought the bionic eye was a bit ridiculous, but
yes,
nothing, nowhere near. They sold it more than the Invisible Car and Die Another Day. So
and the payoff was brilliant.
I accepted the bionic eye. I loved the really gothic, weird scene of the three bold waiters carrying the eye so Blofeld could see the party. That was fantastic. And the fact that Blofeld had been actually communicating and watching his business from inside Belmarsh, I thought was a really good twist. So I forgave all the absolute ridiculous. I forgave the nanobots in this. I forgave the bionic eye in this. I forgave Bond's my watch blew his mind quip, because that's effectively.
Oh, that was a really good moment, though. I think we looked at each other at that bed, didn't we, JO? When he's
that's his last quip, his final quip. Yeah. So I'll allow that.
Although there was a better quip waiting to happen. I can't remember quite what it was, but the quip that I was expecting was something like, he finally saw it coming. Something along those lines. Because it's an eye quip, isn't it? The blow his mind thing ignores the fact that it's an eye. The quip really needed to mention the eye. So he didn't see it coming or something along those lines. Would have been better, but it was okay. But guys,
I very much appreciated No Time to Die. However, I don't know if you noticed that.
But guys, we've long overrun the short amount of time we had because it's a weeknight and we were supposed to finish 10 minutes ago. So unless anybody's got anything else they really want to bring up, let's try and come up with some final thoughts and give it a score. Final thought for me is I just love the idea that they gave Bond a family. And I love the idea that they gave Bond a family and then took him away from that family in the same movie, because that is the kind of heart-wrenching emotional stuff that you need in a Bond movie. In You Only Live Twice, where he gets married and she gets killed. In On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where the same thing happens. You know, these are always the moments that you remember in the Bond films, or at least they are for me. So that's what I really loved about this. Simon?
There I was thinking he'd been firing blanks all these years, because I thought he must have had children everywhere, so anyway, yes, I really enjoyed it. I now, from talking about it now, it does feel like there's set pieces and there's things to remember. I mean, that's one of the big things with James Bond. So I do think it's stronger as a movie than I thought, because I really enjoyed it. As a ride, I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. But I wasn't sure what shape it was, if you see what I mean. But now, the more I think about it, all the stuff with the families and some of the set pieces, it was another really, really good chapter in the Daniel Craig James Bond pantheon. So yes, I really, really liked it.
And for once in a Daniel Craig movie, it doesn't end on a big set piece where a house comes crumbling down around them as they scrap it out at the end. Lee, what was your final takeaway from this movie?
Well, they had a lot to prove in this film. It's been one of the most anticipated films in ages, but also as a Bond film, the last Daniel Craig, etc., etc. So, and it's the 25th film, so it has to be massive. They included as much as they could from all of the old films without alienating any new watchers, I think. So that was quite clever, and quite well kind of placed. Throughout the movie, the music was exquisite. Hans Zimmer, and using moments from the beautiful whatever the song was, which I can't remember now because I got cold. I have all the time in the world. Yeah, and using that quote when he said that quote, I literally had a chill down my spine. I thought, oh, this is good. They're going to be dropping this stuff. So with that in mind, with all of the amazing set pieces and massively long action sequences, which were really easy to watch and really great to get into, with the family connection running underneath, with Daniel Craig throwing a bit more emotion in, not too much but enough, and with the whole of the what the heck's going to happen with Bond, and look at this landscape has changed, and look at how Bond has fallen into it in this particular film. I think they've done an incredible it's an incredible achievement to make a film like this and come out the other end with all of us basically saying we really enjoyed it. We enjoyed the film, and it's going to deserve at least another 3 or 4 watches before I think I have a proper feeling about how I feel about it. But this definitely whittles all over Spectre for me, and actually Skyfall too. So, and yeah, out of the 5, it's the second best one for me so far.
Matt?
Well, it was Lee saying that this would make it like a 5-day series, the Craig films. And for me, it doesn't whittle over Spectre and Skyfall. For me, it makes Skyfall and Spectre make sense. And it makes Quantum of Solace, it gives Quantum of Solace a place as well. So I think all 5 films have been remarkably consistent. Some are better than others. I think this is my second or third favorite Daniel Craig film. But as a run of Bond films, this has been the best run in Bond's history. And that means I think Daniel Craig's been the best actor in a Bond film, the most successful Bond. So this is kind of the combination of really the sort of the golden years of Bond, which is completely, if you'd seen Die Another Day as I did at the cinema, who would have thought that Barbara Broccoli would actually pull this out of the bag? And that's the achievement, I think. It's not just this film, it's the fact that they got away with it 5 films later.
Do you want to give it a score out of 10 then, Matt?
Yeah, I think it's a 9 out of 10.
Lee, how about you?
I'm giving it a 9 as well.
Oh, Simon.
Another 9.
Wow. Well, I feel a bit churlish now because I'm going for an 8 because I do feel there were elements that didn't quite work in the middle. So I thought it started and ended really strongly. I thought the middle, for me, it's an 8. It may go up.
Hang on a minute. Let me just ask. I just need to phone up Daniel Craig. Oh, no, he's right behind me. For those who can't see, Daniel's in the room. I was just going to ask him, Daniel, how do you feel about JR's response to an 8? He said. Oh, really? Oh, right. He's going to kill you.
This is a bit of improv from Lee, where he didn't really think about the ending before he thought about the beginning.
You're going to be his last kill, JR.
I think it's a bit late, Lee. I think he's gone.
He's not there. Look, he's here, right behind me.
He looks a little... Until
stiff.
We do all this again, I was JR.
I was Lee.
I was Matt.
I was Simon.
And we will speak again soon. Right. There we go. That was way longer than it was supposed to be, but I think we'll live. Right, I'm going to have to call off, though, so...
Okay.
We'll do the other things on Saturday, right?
Shall I stop recording?
Yeah, if everybody just stops recording, sends me what they've got as quick as they can, because I'm going to try and put this out tomorrow morning.
Yeah, I will go and just take out all my coughing. Otherwise, it's going to be horrible. It won't take long.
Oh, okay, if you wish.
Yeah.
All right.
I didn't hear
I don't
much
think it was
coughing,
much
Lee.
coughing.
Yeah.
No, that's because I kept muting. You couldn't hear it on here, but there's a shitload going through. So I'm going to just take out the spikes and it'll be done.
All right. But the video hopefully will be out in about half an hour or so once I've downloaded it. Right. Oh, and speaking of which, I suppose I ought to press stop on